I raised millionaires' children who called me family, came home to my own kids treating me like the help. If you feel something while listening to my story, drop a comment and let me know where you watching from. Now let's get into it. The crystal champagne flute felt foreign in my hand as I stood in the corner of the ballroom at Michael Jr.'s Harvard Medical School graduation party. Not invited as a guest, mind you. I was working, just like I had been for the past 38 years in this mansion. And I want to thank the woman who's been more than a housekeeper, who's been a second mother to me, Michael Jr. was saying at the microphone, his eyes finding me in the crowd. Dorothy Wilson, I wouldn't be the man I am today without you. The crowd turned, applauding me like I was some kind of saint. Mrs. Elizabeth Harrington dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, as if she was the one being honored. Her husband Richard nodded in my direction, that satisfied look of a man who believes his money buys loyalty. I smiled and nodded, the mask I'd perfected over decades slipping into place automatic. My hands itched to check my phone, wondering if my own son Marcus had called back about his new job. My daughter Tanya hadn't returned my calls in 3 days. Speech, Dorothy! Say something! Emma Harrington, their middle child, called out. She was 35 now, but still had the entitled energy of the teenager who'd cry on my shoulder whenever her mama was too busy with charity galas. I cleared my throat. I'm just proud of you, Michael, I said, keeping it simple. Always knew you'd do great things. What I didn't say was how I'd missed Marcus's high school graduation because Michael had the flu that day. Or how I'd comforted Emma through her first heartbreak while my own daughter was going through the same thing across town with nobody but my sister Evelyn to hold her. Later that night, I climbed the stairs to my tiny subsidized apartment in Dorchester, my feet aching from standing all day. The elevator was broken again. The contrast between the marble foyer I'd left and this crumbling hallway with flickering lights never failed to hit me like a physical blow. Inside, I kicked off my sensible black shoes and checked my phone. Still no call from Tanya. Marcus had texted, "Can't talk, working late." I shuffled through the mail on my table. Another collection notice addressed to Marcus but sent to my address. The third one this year, $8,000 in unpaid loans. My stomach twisted as I opened it. The phone rang, startling me. It was Thomas, the oldest Harrington child, always the observant one. "Dorothy, I just wanted to make sure you got home safe. And to say, well, I noticed you seemed tired today." "I'm fine, Thomas. Just fine." My voice didn't betray the weight pressing down on my chest. Mother and father don't always see. Well, anyway, get some rest. I hung up and stared at the collection notice in my hand. In my purse was the $500 bonus Richard Harrington had pressed into my palm tonight. "You're part of the celebration," he'd said with that smile that never reached his eyes. $500 for raising his son. $8,000 in debt for failing to raise my own. I closed my eyes and leaned back in my chair, the sounds of the Harringtons' applause still ringing in my ears like an accusation. The hospital corridor reeked of disinfectant and despair. I'd rushed here straight from the Harringtons after getting the call about Tanya. My hands still smelled like the lemon polish I'd been using on Elizabeth's antique cabinets. "Room 307, the nurse said, giving me that look. The one that said she'd seen too many black mothers rushing in after work, still in their uniforms. I found Tanya hooked up to machines, her skin ashen against the white hospital sheets. Drug overdose, they'd said. My baby girl, 31 years old and fighting for her life because of substances I hadn't even known she was using. "Mama?" Her voice was sandpaper rough. "I'm here, baby." I reached for her hand, noticing how thin her wrists had become. She pulled away. "Now you show up. Where were you when I needed you?" The words hit harder than any physical blow. "Tanya, save it." Her eyes burned with a lifetime of resentment. "Were you busy with your white children? The ones you actually raised?" My mind flashed back to 20 years ago. Tanya in her school play, the lead role she'd been so excited about. I'd promised to be there, but Michael Jr. had come down with a fever, and Mrs. Harrington had an important dinner party that couldn't be rescheduled. "You think I wanted to miss your life?" My voice cracked. "I was trying to keep a roof over our heads, food on the table." "Other mothers managed," she spat. "They showed up. They were present." An older black nurse came in to check Tanya's vitals. Our eyes met briefly, that silent recognition between women who understood sacrifice. She'd probably raised somebody else's children too, or watched her own mother do it. "Your pressure's still high, honey," she said to Tanya. Then to me, quieter, She's been through a lot. The withdrawal is making her emotional. After the nurse left, I sat in the uncomfortable chair beside Tanya's bed. The silence between us stretched like a canyon. When I was little, Tanya finally said, I used to tell the other kids at school that my mama worked for important people, like that made it okay that you were never around. She laughed bitterly. I was so proud. Stupid, right? I remembered how the Harrington children would brag about me at their private school. Dorothy makes the best cookies. Dorothy tells the best stories. All while my own children ate store-bought snacks and put themselves to bed with no stories at all. It wasn't supposed to be forever, I whispered, just until I could save enough to give y'all a better life. And how'd that work out? Mama? Tanya gestured weakly at the hospital room. You gave us everything except the one thing we needed. You. Outside the window, dawn was breaking. I'd been at the hospital all night. Elizabeth would be expecting me at 7:30 sharp to prepare breakfast. 38 years of never being late. I need to call work, I said, reaching for my phone. Tanya's laugh was hollow. Some things never change. I hesitated, my finger hovering over Elizabeth Harrington's number. For the first time, I felt the full weight of my choices pressing down on me like a physical thing. Actually, I said, putting the phone away, they can wait. The apartment complex where Marcus lived made my building look like a palace. Graffiti decorated the stairwell, and the hallway smelled like weed and fried food. I clutched the container of homemade mac and cheese I'd brought, a peace offering. I knocked twice before Marcus opened the door, surprise flickering across his face. Mama? What you doing here on a Tuesday? He looked over my shoulder, like he was expecting someone else. Before I could answer, a little girl appeared behind him. My grandbaby Zoe, 8 years old, and hardly knew me. You're late, he said, and I got work in an hour. I took the day off, I said, the words still feeling strange in my mouth. I'd called Elizabeth this morning, told her I needed a personal day. She'd acted like I'd announced I was quitting. You sick or something? Marcus asked, finally stepping aside to let me in. The apartment was small but surprisingly neat. A child's drawings covered the refrigerator. School photos and dollar store frames lined a shelf. Grandma brought food, Zoe announced, eyeing the container. Go wash your hands first, Marcus told her, then turned to me. For real though, what's going on? You never take days off. I set the food down on his kitchen counter. Tanya's in the hospital, overdose. Marcus's face hardened. Again? You knew? Course I knew. I'm the one who found her last time. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My children had whole lives I knew nothing about. Why didn't you tell me? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Would it have mattered? Would you have left precious Mr. and Mrs. Harrington to come help? A memory surfaced. Marcus at 16, sitting in a police station after being caught spray painting an abandoned building. Me, arriving 3 hours late because Emma had a dance recital I couldn't miss. I'm trying, Marcus. Little late, don't you think? Zoe's 8 already. As if summoned by her name, Zoe returned, hands still damp. Grandma, want to see my project? It's about family heroes. She pulled out a crumpled paper from her backpack. There I was, a crayon drawing labeled, My Grandma Who Works for Important People and Is Too Busy for Family. Marcus saw my face. Kids tell it like it is, huh? Later, as I was leaving, Marcus stopped me at the door. Tanya's gonna need rehab, real rehab, not that county program that kicks him out after 3 days. I know. I'm figuring it out. Good luck with that on a maid's salary, he said, then softened slightly. Thanks for the food, though. Zoe liked seeing you. Back at the Harrington mansion that evening, I found my photo in an expensive silver frame on the mantel. Me holding baby Michael Jr., my smile genuine. I remembered that day. He'd said his first word, Dodo, for Dorothy. I'd been so proud. Another frame held a picture from Emma's 16th birthday, the same day Marcus had graduated high school. I hadn't been there to see him accept his diploma. Thomas came in while I was dusting the frames. You look troubled, Dorothy. Just thinking. He studied me carefully. You know, I've always wondered about your other life, your real family. Do you ever talk about us to them? The question caught me off guard. No, I admitted. I don't talk much about them to you either. I noticed, he said quietly. It's like you live in 2 separate worlds, and neither one is really mine, I whispered, not meaning for him to hear. But he did. The 4th of July barbecue at the Harringtons was in full swing. Red, white, and blue decorations everywhere, champagne flowing like water. I moved through the crowd with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, invisible until needed. "Dorothy, be a dear and bring more ice," Elizabeth called, not looking up from her conversation with the wife of a state senator. I studied her as I walked past, designer sundress, diamond earrings catching the sunlight, her 3 successful children scattered around the garden, Thomas in deep conversation with a law partner, Emma showing off her engagement ring, Michael Jr. celebrating his new position at Massachusetts General. The only other black faces belonged to the 2 young men from the catering company. One caught my eye as I passed, a flash of recognition. We were both playing the same role. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from Evelyn. "Marcus in trouble. Bar fight. Police station downtown." My heart sank. I found Elizabeth by the bar. "Mrs. Harrington, I need to leave for a few hours. Family emergency." Her smile vanished. "Today? Dorothy, we have 20 guests. Surely whatever it is can wait." I swallowed hard. "My son's been arrested." Her lips tightened. "Again? Really, Dorothy, at some point he needs to take responsibility for himself." Thomas appeared beside his mother, champagne glass in hand. "Everything all right?" "Dorothy's son is in trouble again," Elizabeth said, making no attempt to lower her voice, "and she wants to abandon us in the middle of our party." I felt heat rising in my face. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience." Thomas set his glass down. "I can have James drive you downtown. He's just sitting in the garage anyway." "That won't be necessary," I said quickly, knowing it would only make things worse with Elizabeth. "No, it certainly won't be," Elizabeth said coldly. "Dorothy can handle her family problems after our guests leave." Thomas looked like he wanted to argue, but I shook my head slightly. Some battles weren't worth fighting. 4 hours later, I finally reached the police station. Marcus had already been released. "Where were you?" he demanded when I found him outside his apartment. "I called 3 hours ago." "I couldn't leave work," I said, exhaustion weighing down every word. "The Harringtons always come first, right?" He laughed bitterly, smelling of alcohol and anger. "Your fake white children always matter more than your real black ones." The memory surfaced without warning. Emma's sweet 16 birthday party. I'd spent weeks planning it, making her favorite cake, decorating the garden with fairy lights, all while missing Marcus's high school graduation. That night I found myself digging through a box in my closet. Inside were all the pieces of my children's lives I'd missed. Report cards, letters from summer camps I couldn't afford to send them to, a yellowed photo from before I started working for the Harringtons. Marcus was 3, Tanya just a baby. I was holding them both, looking tired but happy. Beneath these mementos were the collection notices in Marcus's name, evidence of how my absence had created not just emotional wounds, but financial instability too. "What kind of mother chooses other people's children over her own?" I whispered to the empty room. No answer came except the distant sound of sirens, a Dorchester lullaby so different from the cricket song that surrounded the Harrington estate. "Dorothy, would you mind organizing my office while I'm at my meeting?" Richard Harrington asked, already halfway out the door. "The contractors are coming next week for the renovation." "Yes." "Mr. Harrington," I replied automatically, 38 years of obedience embedded in my bones. Once alone, I began sorting through the stacks of papers on his desk. Richard was old school, always printing important documents. "Can't trust clouds and servers," he'd say. A folder labeled Personal HR Matters caught my eye. I shouldn't look. I knew I shouldn't. I looked. Inside was a recently printed email with my name. "Dorothy is getting too old for the heavy work. We need to think about a transition plan in the next few years." My hands trembled as I kept reading. Another document showed an updated insurance policy where I was listed as an essential human resource for the family, valued at $250,000, the same as the gardener and chauffeur combined. Richard's handwritten note in the margin asked, "Can we reduce this amount?" Like I was depreciating property. Deeper in the stack, I found my original contract, yellowed with age. Reading it with fresh eyes, I realized I'd never been properly compensated for overtime in nearly 4 decades. Later, while cleaning Emma's room for her weekend visit, I found an old diary she'd forgotten on a bookshelf. A teenage entry caught my eye. "Dorothy is like a second mother, but better than the first, she's always available to them, never available to my own." That evening, I got a call from the rehab center where Tanya had been admitted. They needed a deposit for her extended treatment. "Mr. Harrington," I said carefully, finding him in his study. I was wondering if I might get an advance on next month's salary. My daughter's medical bills. He looked up from his computer, frowning. Dorothy, you know we've always helped, but your children need to learn self-sufficiency. You've been so good with our children that I suspect there wasn't enough discipline left for yours. The casual cruelty of his words stole my breath, as if my children's struggles were a reflection of my parenting, not my absence. Thank you for your consideration, I said stiffly, turning to leave. Dorothy, he called after me, remember the Thompsons are coming for dinner Friday. Emma specifically requested your peach cobbler. At the rehab center that night, Tanya looked better than she had in the hospital. Less hollow, more present. They say I can stay 8 weeks if the funding comes through, she said. It will, I promised, though I had no idea how. Tanya studied my face, really seeing me for the first time in years. Why'd you do it, Mama? Why'd you give everything to them and nothing to us? I thought I was building a better future, I whispered. I thought money and security were what mattered most. And now? Now I know better, I said, the truth of it settling into my bones. But knowing better and doing better are two different things. She reached for my hand, the first gesture of forgiveness. It's not too late, you know. Not completely. That night, driving back to my apartment, I realized the truth. I'd sacrificed my own children on the altar of the Harringtons' success, and the result had been disastrous for everyone. Your granddaughter has pneumonia? Elizabeth Harrington repeated, like I'd told her Zoe had sprouted wings. But Emma's wedding planning meeting is tomorrow. You know how she counts on you. I understand, Mrs. Harrington, I said, standing straighter than I had in years. But Zoe needs me. I'm requesting 1 week of family leave. Family leave? Richard looked up from his newspaper. Dorothy, we've always been generous with time off when you needed it, but this is simply poor timing. I thought about all the school plays, graduations, birthdays I'd missed. Poor timing indeed. My apologies for the inconvenience, I said, the words hollow after decades of repetition. But I need to be with my granddaughter. Thomas, home for the weekend, spoke up from the doorway. Mother, Father, Dorothy hasn't taken a vacation in years. Surely Emma's wedding won't fall apart if Dorothy takes 1 week to care for a sick child. Elizabeth's lips thinned. Thomas, you don't understand the complexities. I understand employment law quite well, actually, he interrupted, and basic human decency. The tension in the room thickened. I'd never seen Thomas directly challenge his parents before. Fine, Elizabeth finally said. 1 week. We'll manage somehow. As I left the room, I overheard Elizabeth hissing to Richard. She's getting old and irresponsible. Maybe it's time to look for someone younger without so many family problems. Their words should have terrified me. Instead, they crystallized something that had been forming since I found those documents in Richard's office. At Marcus's apartment, I found him giving Zoe medication while checking his phone. Boss keeps calling, he explained. If I miss another shift, that's it. Go, I said, setting down my overnight bag. I'll stay with her. His surprise was almost comical. For real? You got the time off? I took the time, I corrected. There's a difference. While Zoe slept, I used Marcus's laptop to research employment laws. What I found made my blood boil. Minimum wage exemptions for domestic workers. Overtime violations. No retirement benefits. When Zoe woke, feverish and cranky, I held her like I'd never held my own children when they were sick, fully present, without one eye on the clock. Tell me a story, Grandma, she whispered through chapped lips. So I told her about a woman who spent her life taking care of other people's treasures while neglecting her own. But one day, I said, stroking her forehead, she woke up and realized it wasn't too late to change. Did she fix it? Zoe asked, her eyes drooping. She's working on it, I answered truthfully. By the time Marcus returned, I'd made a decision. Not revenge, I wasn't built that way, but restoration, of my dignity, of my family, of the years that should have been ours. You look different, Marcus said as he checked Zoe's temperature. I feel different, I admitted. He studied me suspiciously. This gonna last after you go back to the Harringtons? Things will be different when I go back, I promised. Because I'll be different, he snorted. 38 years says otherwise, Mama. Watch me, I said quietly. Just watch me. The community legal clinic was located in a rundown strip mall in Roxbury. Dr. Jenkins, a black woman about 15 years younger than me, reviewed the documents I'd brought with sharp eyes behind stylish glasses. Mrs. Wilson, Based on what you've told me and these records you've kept, you have grounds for significant compensation for unpaid overtime, she said finally. Unfortunately, the statute of limitations means we can only go back 7 years. 7 years of proper compensation would still change my life, I said. But what if I lose my job for pursuing this? She laid out my options clearly. You're entitled to unemployment while seeking other employment. We can also request provisional payments during litigation if necessary. She tapped my detailed records. And with your experience, finding another position isn't impossible. At my age? I asked skeptically. You'd be surprised, she replied. Many families would value your expertise. The difference is, this time you'll know your worth. That evening, I sat with Marcus at his kitchen table, laptop open between us. We'd spent the afternoon researching vocational training programs and making a plan to tackle his debt. This place has a HVAC certification program. I pointed to the screen. 6 months. 6. And they help with job placement. Costs money, though, he noted. We'll figure it out, I promised, one step at a time. Later that week, I visited Tanya at rehab for a family therapy session. The counselor asked us to share our feelings honestly. I was angry for so long, Tanya admitted, watching you pour everything into those white kids while Auntie Evelyn raised us. But I'm starting to understand it wasn't because you didn't love us. It was never that, I said, fighting tears. I believed giving you material security was more important than giving you time. I was wrong. Tanya's eyes held mine. We all lost in that deal. A memory surfaced. Me, younger and desperate after my husband died, accepting the Harrington job. Elizabeth promising, "You'll be like family," while my small children waited in the car. When I returned to the Harrington mansion, I began setting boundaries. I still did my work excellently, that was my professional pride, but I no longer offered free emotional labor. When the family got home late, I no longer waited to serve dinner. I kept to my scheduled hours, meticulous about the time I arrived and left. Most importantly, I began documenting everything in a notes app on my phone. Hours worked, extra tasks requested, any work outside my contractual obligations. Every comment about my age, my family, my loyalty, a contemporary record of the ongoing labor violations, building my case with each passing day. "Dorothy, you seem different lately," Elizabeth commented one evening as I prepared to leave at exactly 6 p.m. "Do I, Mrs. Harrington?" I asked pleasantly, continuing to gather my things. "Less present," she clarified. I looked her directly in the eyes, something I rarely did before. "I'm exactly where I need to be, Mrs. Harrington, just like always. Dorothy, if you leave now, don't bother coming back." Elizabeth Harrington's ultimatum hung in the air between us. I'd just received a call that Tanya had relapsed and was back in the hospital. Critical condition, they'd said. For 38 years, threats like this had kept me in line. Fear of unemployment, of losing the income my family depended on, had been the chains binding me to this house. "I understand." "Mrs. Harrington," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "do what you think is best." The shock on her face almost made me smile. Almost. At the hospital, Tanya's condition was worse than I'd feared. "Cardiac event related to cocaine use," the doctor explained clinically. "The next 24 hours will be crucial." I sank into the chair beside her bed, holding her limp hand. This time, I had no clock ticking in my head, no mental calculations about when I needed to return to the Harrington household. Marcus arrived an hour later, his face tight with anger. "So, now you show up? Where were you all the other times?" "Marcus, please," I whispered, gesturing to Tanya's unconscious form. He fell silent, anger giving way to fear as he took in his sister's condition. We spent the night together in that sterile room, the beeping machines creating a rhythm that felt like borrowed time. Around 3 a.m., with Tanya finally stabilized, Marcus asked the question, "What happened with the Harringtons?" "I think I quit," I said, surprising myself with a small laugh. "Or got fired. Not sure which." "For real?" His eyebrows shot up. "After all this time, what are you going to do now?" I told him about my meetings with Dr. Jenkins, the documentation I'd been gathering, the plan to seek compensation. It won't be a fortune, but it should be enough to help Tanya get proper treatment and maybe help with your technical training program. "And if it doesn't work out, then I find another job," I said simply. "But this time, I set the terms. This time, you and Tanya come first." Marcus studied me in the dim light. like he was seeing a stranger. Never thought I'd hear you say that. I should have said it decades ago. 3 days later, my phone rang with a number I knew by heart. Thomas Harrington. Dorothy, he said when I answered. How is your daughter? His genuine concern caught me off guard. Stabilized. Thank you for asking. I'm glad. He paused. My parents want you to come back. Emma's wedding is coming up, and they're struggling without you. Are they now? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. They're offering a raise, he added, his tone suggesting he didn't think much of the gesture. And my hours? Overtime pay? Health benefits? Silence then. They didn't mention those specifics. Then I have some terms of my own, I said, surprising myself with my boldness. Fixed hours, proper overtime compensation, regular days off, and respect for my family obligations. More silence. I'll convey your terms, he finally said. For what it's worth, I think they're more than reasonable. When I returned to the Harrington mansion 3 days later, I could feel the shift in power. Elizabeth and Richard were coldly polite, clearly unhappy about my new conditions, but unwilling to lose me before Emma's wedding. It was just the beginning of my plan, and for the first time in decades, I walked through those grand doors not as a servant grateful for crumbs, but as a woman who knew her worth. Emma's wedding was a spectacular affair at the Harrington estate. 200 guests, flowers flown in from Holland, a dress from a designer whose name I couldn't pronounce. I worked behind the scenes, making sure everything was perfect, professional to the end. During a rare, quiet moment, Thomas found me arranging dessert plates in the kitchen. How's your daughter? He asked, loosening his tie. Better, I said. The new treatment center is good. Expensive, but good. He nodded thoughtfully. You know, I've always wondered what it would be like if our parents had been as present as you were. Maybe we'd have less professional success, but he trailed off. More of other things? I suggested. Exactly. He leaned against the counter. I've been handling some labor rights cases pro bono. Not my firm's usual clientele. That's so? Yes. It's interesting how what's legal isn't always what's fair. His eyes met mine meaningfully. My parents have lived in that gray area for a long time. During the reception, I heard Michael Jr.'s toast. To our Dorothy, who raised us with as much love as our own mother. Elizabeth smiled tightly beside him, a flush creeping up her neck. Later, while retrieving more champagne from Richard's office, I noticed his tablet on the desk, notification light blinking. Without thinking, I glanced at the screen and froze. It was an email chain with a domestic staffing agency. Replacement for Dorothy after summer. They were planning to replace me, even while smiling to my face and accepting my new terms. I quickly took a photo of the screen with my phone, more evidence for my case. Throughout the reception, I continued my meticulous documentation, photographing the clock when I started and finished tasks, listing additional requests, recording comments from the family. My new attention to procedures and timing was dismissed by the Harringtons as age-related eccentricity, not the methodical building of a legal case. That night, I called Marcus. I need your help with something, I said when he answered. What's that? Taking back what's ours. He was quiet for a moment. You serious about this? Never been more serious in my life. His laugh held a note of respect I hadn't heard in years. All right then, Mama. Let's do this. The next day, I met with Dr. Jenkins again, bringing my latest documentation. They're already planning to replace me, I explained, showing her the photo of Richard's tablet. Then we need to move quickly, she agreed. But carefully. You've built a strong case, Dorothy. Stronger than you realize. As I left her office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. The power of choosing my own path, of fighting for what was rightfully mine. Not just money, but dignity, but family, time, the things that should have been mine all along. The Harringtons will likely try to settle once they realize how strong your case is, Dr. Jenkins explained as we finalized the paperwork. People like them prefer to avoid public scandals. I nodded, signing where she indicated. And if they fire me during this process, you'll receive unemployment while we pursue your claim. We can also seek provisional payments if necessary. She studied me over her glasses. Are you prepared for this fight, Dorothy? It won't be easy. I've been working for the Harringtons since 1987, I replied. Nothing about it has been easy. Back at the mansion, I maintained my professional demeanor while continuing to document everything. Thomas, increasingly aware of the change in me, approached one afternoon while I was arranging flowers. "You're different lately," he observed. "More present somehow, even while being less available." I met his gaze directly. "I'm just making sure I receive what I'm legally entitled to." Instead of surprise, I saw understanding in his eyes. "Good," he said simply. "It's about time." He hesitated, then added, "I've always been uncomfortable with how my parents built their wealth and reputation, on the labor of people like you, Dorothy, paying the minimum possible and expecting eternal gratitude." He lowered his voice. "If things get complicated, I could help mediate." Meanwhile, I dedicated my days off to rebuilding my family. I visited Tanya regularly at her new treatment center, participating in family therapy sessions that were painful but necessary. With Marcus, I established weekly dinner dates where we reviewed his progress in the HVAC certification program and refined our plan for tackling his debt. At the Harrington house, I continued working efficiently, but withdrew the emotional support I'd always provided. When Emma called crying about marital problems just weeks after her honeymoon, I gently suggested she talk to her mother instead. "But you always know what to say," she protested. "Your mother might surprise you," I replied, not unkindly. Elizabeth confronted me in the kitchen later that week. "Emma says you've been distant with her. She's upset." "I apologize if that's how it seems," I said carefully. "I'm simply focusing on my designated responsibilities." "You used to care about this family," she accused. "I still care very much about doing my job well." "Mrs. Harrington," I replied, emphasis on the word job. She studied me with narrowed eyes. "You're not the same, Dorothy." For once, we agreed on something. The following week, Zoe's school had a Grandparents' Day event. For the first time in my working life, I requested the morning off without apology or excessive gratitude. Sitting in the elementary school auditorium, watching Zoe perform in a short play, I felt a strange mixture of joy and grief. Joy at being present, grief for all the similar moments I'd missed with Marcus and Tanya. "You came," Marcus whispered beside me, surprise still evident in his voice. "I promised, didn't I?" I squeezed his hand. "I'm done breaking promises to my family." The look in his eyes, a cautious hope replacing decades of disappointment, was worth more than any praise the Harringtons had ever given me. That evening, Thomas called to inform me that his parents were returning early from their European vacation. "They want to have a meeting with you tomorrow," he said, his tone warning me to be prepared. "Thank you for letting me know," I replied calmly. "Dorothy," he added before hanging up, "whatever happens, remember you have options." I slept more peacefully that night than I had in years, ready for whatever came next. Richard Harrington sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, with Elizabeth standing rigidly beside him. The formal setting of his office made their intentions clear before a word was spoken. "Dorothy," Richard began, unusually direct, "we've noticed a significant change in your attitude recently. After discussing it, Elizabeth and I feel it's time for you to retire. We're prepared to be generous," Elizabeth added quickly. $50,000 as a thank you for your years of service. We think that's more than fair." I maintained a neutral expression, though inside I was seething at their definition of generous after nearly 4 decades of labor. "I appreciate your offer," I said carefully, "but I'd prefer to discuss this with my attorney present." The word attorney landed like a bomb. Elizabeth's face flushed with anger. "Attorney? After everything we've done for you? We treated you like family." "Family doesn't receive a salary, Mrs. Harrington," I replied steadily. "Employees do, and employees have rights." Richard's expression hardened. "If that's your position, we'll have our lawyers contact yours. But I think you'll find this is a very generous offer, Dorothy. Most housekeepers don't receive any retirement package at all." The door opened behind me, and Thomas walked in, a surprise to all of us. "I thought I might sit in," he said, closing the door. "Since we're discussing legal matters." Richard frowned. "This doesn't concern you, Thomas." "I think it does," he countered, taking a seat beside me. "Especially since Dorothy's attorney might raise questions about decades of unpaid overtime, denied benefits, and other labor violations." Elizabeth gasped. "Thomas, whose side are you on?" "The side of what's right," he answered quietly. The next meeting included Dr. Jenkins, who presented detailed documentation of years of labor violations. She explained how the compensation owed significantly exceeded their generous offer of $50,000. "We also have evidence," she said calmly, "of your plans to replace Mrs. Wilson months ago, while continuing to violate labor laws, and this insurance document valuing her as a resource raises interesting questions about how you viewed her role. Richard threatened to ensure I'd never work in Boston again. Elizabeth demanded to know how I could betray them after all they'd done for me. Thomas interrupted his parents' tirade. This would be a mistake. Dorothy has documentation for a very public case. Think about what that would do to your reputation, Father, your philanthropy work, your board positions. The negotiation was tense, with the Harringtons initially refusing to acknowledge any wrongdoing. But when Thomas confirmed he'd reviewed the evidence and found it compelling, their position weakened. "I'm not asking for anything beyond what's legally mine," I said finally. "I dedicated my life to this family, often at the expense of my own. Now I need to care for my children and grandchild." Dr. Jenkins proposed an out-of-court settlement, fair compensation for me, discretion for the Harringtons. Richard and Elizabeth, realizing they were cornered, reluctantly agreed to negotiate. As we left, Thomas walked us to the door. "I'll make sure they follow through," he promised. "It's the least I can do." "Why are you helping me?" I asked. He smiled sadly. "Because you taught me more about integrity than they ever did." In the car, Dr. Jenkins turned to me. "The battle's not over. They'll try to reduce the settlement, add restrictive clauses. Are you prepared for a long negotiation?" I watched the Harrington mansion grow smaller in the side mirror, no longer intimidated by its grandeur. "I've waited 38 years, I said. "I can wait a little longer for justice." 18 months later, I rocked gently on the front porch of my modest Dorchester home, watching the neighborhood children play in the early evening light. My home, still strange to think of it that way. The settlement with the Harringtons, finalized after 6 months of tense negotiations, wasn't life-changing money, but it was enough for a down payment on this house and some crucial new beginnings. Thomas had been instrumental, quietly threatening to testify against his own parents if necessary. His support gave Dr. Jenkins the leverage she needed to counter the Harringtons' attempts to minimize their liability and add restrictive clauses about what I could say about my time with them. While the negotiations dragged on, I worked as a consultant for families looking to hire household staff, using my experience to ensure the arrangements were fair to both sides. I took satisfaction in helping create employment situations built on respect rather than exploitation. The front door opens behind me, and Tanya steps out with 2 glasses of iced tea. "Thought you might be thirsty," she says, settling into the chair beside me. 15 months sober now, she's working part-time at a community center while finishing her GED. The road hasn't been smooth. There have been near relapses, bitter arguments, and nights of doubt. But we're building something real between us, something that should have existed all along. "Marcus called," she adds. "He's bringing Zoe over for dinner tomorrow. Said he got that promotion at the HVAC company." I smile, thinking of how far he's come. The technical training program, paid for partly with my settlement money, gave him the certification he needed for stable employment. We used another portion to negotiate with his creditors, reducing his total debt to a manageable amount he's paying off systematically. "Never thought we'd end up here," Tanya says, gesturing to the house, the neighborhood, our shared life. All 3 of us under one roof some days, like a real family. "We were always a real family," I say. "I just wasn't really present in it." The evening brings more visitors, my sister Evelyn and her husband, cousins I rarely saw during my Harrington years, neighbors becoming friends. For the first time in decades, I host a family gathering in my own space, something impossible when I lived in that tiny subsidized apartment and worked 60-hour weeks. Later, after everyone has gone, I find a letter in the mail from Michael Jr. Harrington. He and Emma have finally understood how much the family unfairly depended on me, he writes, and they're trying to build better relationships with their parents. "You taught us more about family than we realized," the letter concludes. I note that I haven't heard directly from Richard or Elizabeth since the settlement. There's also a note from Thomas, sharing that he's left the family firm to work in labor rights law, inspired partly by my case. "You did more than recover what was owed to you," he writes. "You helped me find my true purpose." He mentions he's working on state legislation to strengthen domestic workers' rights. My phone rings. Marcus, confirming dinner tomorrow. "And Ma," he adds before hanging up, "Zoe wants to take a family picture for some school project, so wear something nice, all right?" I smile as I hang up. After decades of taking photos of the Harrington family at their celebrations, I'm finally building a visual record of my own family's milestones. The reconciliation hasn't been easy. It took time, tears, and honest conversations about the past. There were moments when it seemed the damage was too deep to repair, but slowly, painfully, we've created something new from the ruins of what should have been. As I prepare for bed in a house that belongs to me, I realize that it's never too late to be the mother my children need. Never too late to be the woman I deserve to be. The true family, the one built with genuine presence, not just money or good intentions, is finally coming together. Imperfect, rebuilding, but authentically mine. And as I fall asleep in a home filled with evidence of my own legacy, I understand at last, what matters isn't the lives we help build for others, but the roots we plant for our own future. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and share your story in the comments. Your journey might inspire another queen.